Hello and welcome everybody to MAN471. My name is Roland and these are the slides I used when teaching fundamentals of project management at International Business School in Suzhou between 2017 and 2019 when I resigned. The final session was talking about project closure and giving students a very brief overview of what is actually project success, continued professional development and professional organizations in the business, and a wrap-up of how risk management works and why it is important. The difference between project closure and termination needs to be looked at. So when we close a project, we can fairly say we have the job done, we have delivered the product to the customer, can use the resources we have used on another project, reassigning them, and conduct a lessons learned review. But the question is every project we close a success? And is every project we terminate really a failure? And why would we terminate a project? When we do terminate a project, we do it for very good reasons. There will be no delivery of a project. We will stop what we are doing, obviously using the resources somewhere else. And we really should very critically look at the lessons we have learned in this project. Now, on both occasions, the project ends and we can learn some things from it, hopefully. The differences are whether we actually conduct a delivery. The differences are what are the reasons for the end of the project and how that actually impacts on the strategic situation of the organization. Now, the decision to terminate a project is very, very difficult. Do we make it against all the odds under the current circumstances, or do we stop? That in itself is a very difficult situation because we have already spent a lot of money on the project, and it is very, very difficult to say we have spent so much money, we are now stopping it and not getting anything out of it. So there will be a cost-benefit analysis, hopefully, that what are the benefits still worth? How much are we paying to achieve these benefits? What would happen if we instead use this money somewhere else on a project that is more strategically important to the organization? There is the myth that some organizations and some projects are too big to fail, but the size and the amount of money that you have invested in a project should not be the sole or maybe even the main criterion when you are making this decision to actually kill a project. If the benefits are of insignificant importance in a new strategic situation, if the organization is or has decided to move into a different direction, why would you spend more money on something that does not deliver the benefits that you originally wanted, or benefits that are no longer of the same value to you? We need to understand that money in this consideration is not everything, and it does not determine whether the project was a success or a failure. We need to start looking at project success in a different way. Not every project that delivers, even if they are on time and within the budget, are successful. Now, contrary to this kind of thinking, not every project that costs more than we anticipated or takes longer than we thought it would is a failure. One of the critical assessment criteria is, what does the client actually think about it? Is the client happy with our work and what we deliver for them? And we can see that the terms success and failure become multidimensional very quickly. Now, when making these choices, the project manager and the organization need to make very difficult choices under very difficult circumstances, often you are asked to do important decisions on an ad hoc basis without even having all the data present. As I used to say, this is like juggling dirty dishes while riding a bicycle that is on fire with one hand. It is difficult, and every decision you make will eliminate certain choices that you have at that moment in time, and it will open up, on the other hand, a number of choices you didn't know you have. In either case, I do recommend learn from the project and ask the questions, did we do this project right? Ask yourself, did we do the right project? And the most important question, what can we do better next time? The reality is that everybody is just leaving, doesn't have any time to reflect, and many organizations and their executives live in their own little dream world that they can't possibly make any kind of mistake. Everything is all right. The salary is great. Let's move on. Now, this kind of attitude increasingly leads to very severe consequences over time. We will make the same mistakes on a different day in a different project. And we will run business as usual like we used to do until reality makes a calling. Looking at, for example, Nokia, the most successful and largest mobile phone seller, going from being the largest entity in the market to completely irrelevant with the rise of smartphones. Ironically, Nokia is the company that invented smartphones long before Apple did, but they didn't use that idea, they didn't further that idea, and not transferring their expertise into this new environment of smartphones, looking into different operating systems other than their own, is eventually caused them to fall out of favor with the customer, and people started buying iPhones and Samsung phones, and obviously now also other manufacturers that all offer smartphones. In fact, it is very, very difficult to get a dumb phone nowadays if you only just want to use it for making a call. Mistakes are being repeated until they become fatal. This is another application of Martek's law that I am introducing in another lecture, talking about how when you deny the reality and offer a beautiful picture, a nice facade of the house, while the whole entity starts rotting from the inside, and some point the discrepancy between image and reality is so big that the whole structure just collapses. But how would we conduct a lessons learned review? We need to conduct it at the end, not at the beginning. Only after everything is done, we can analyze the whole thing, and we should not do it immediately after the project. So we need to stay in touch with continuous professional development and do a professional 360-degree review of the project we completed with a significant time distance between completion and analysis. Now, how does a project closure actually work? First of all, the customer needs to accept what we have produced, and we need to hand over the project and the documentation. Everybody pays all the bills that are outstanding. We release the resources to new tasks, and then we review and evaluate the performance of the project. So what we are trying to do is to orderly disengage and hand over the project, learn from our mistake, and update our knowledge database what we know. When we terminate a project, it depends on our review and evaluation. And very neutrally spoken, we terminate a project that has a negative cost-benefit analysis. The question is then, does the customer accept the project? Probably not. We pay off all our bills, release the resources, and we can see this as a form of damage limitation. We don't want to continue making this same mistake and withdraw as orderly as possible under the given circumstances. The important question is, will we learn from our mistakes, or will we try to forget this, moving on and doing the same stuff on a new project? Do we really update our knowledge base with this kind of experience, or we run into the same error on another day? Unfortunately, it is more often the case that we do not conduct a lessons learned review, especially on those projects where it would be needed. Now, what kind of documentation do we want to produce and hand over? For example, we need to produce a manual for the product or service that we have created for the customer. We need to document all employment-related paperwork, send people off with credentials, references, and so on. Obviously, if we conduct a lessons learned review, we should actually document that and store it in our database, wherever that may be. But we haven't answered actually what is project success. Now, I already said the customer is happy with what they got. That is a great indication of project success. An old-fashioned approach would be time cost quality, and indeed there are project management organizations that strictly look at time cost quality when determining was this project successful or not. Now, at the same time, PMI, for example, continuously annually reports the same amount of wastage and failure, and that hasn't really changed over the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years. So the question from this kind of evidence is, what are we actually learning? How well are we actually progressing in terms of learning and furthering project management? Now, this gives room to think, and the idea that we can learn something and make that a project success is not new and sometimes sounds a bit counterintuitive, but if we would actually learn something, wouldn't those percentages of failure and budget wastage change over time? Sometimes the only success we can see is we didn't blow anything up. Other items to look at is the understanding that perceptions of success and the outcomes of a project can change over time. So, for example, how did Apple create the iPod, the iPad, the iMac, and so on? And not many people know that at some point Microsoft actually loaned and invested $150 million in Apple so they could continue operating. Now, why would Microsoft do that? Why wouldn't they say, oh, great, our greatest competitor is going bust, let's celebrate? No, they actually wanted Apple to continue to exist, and Apple is one of the most valuable brands nowadays. When we talk about stakeholders, instead of controlling them, increasingly the focus shifts on collaborating with stakeholders. Stakeholders are defined as somebody with an interest in your company or the project. When you look at success in terms of what about nuclear power and the ongoing debate, should we continue using nuclear power? Yes, no, maybe, yeah, under those circumstances, but I don't want it anywhere near me. At some point, we need to understand the realities of energy consumption and that nuclear power probably will play a role in the future, not necessarily in the definitions of what we understand as nuclear power right now today. And in fact, there are practical and theoretical designs that are eliminating and addressing the most often gathered critical points about nuclear power. So what about nuclear waste? Well, we can design a reactor that actually uses up nuclear waste so that the end products that's coming out at the other end of this type of reactor is not radioactive for 10,000 years, maybe just for 100 years, which is already a great improvement. And if we do not stop research into nuclear power, we might even find solutions to reduce that even further. How about the Panama Canal and the controversial enlargement of the Panama Canal that has just a couple of years or months gone online and is now being used? How about the Trans-Australian Railway that was a complete financial disaster for the government in Australia? However, the positive side of the Trans-Australian Railway is that Australia has dramatically reduced CO2 emissions, and if the hole in the ozone layer is right above your head, that might be more of a consideration than the financial success or failure of a venture. Now, fun fact on the Trans-Australian Railway, it is possibly so successful right now because the company that owns a lot of mines to bring minerals to the port of Darwin now owns the railway, and maybe they haven't used it before they didn't own it. Food for thought. What actually makes you successful or a project? The answer is it depends. We cannot answer it in a linear fashion. We need to look at more than just one or two factors. Now, if we're asking ourselves, did we do the project right? We need to focus on whether or not the practice standards of project management were used. Did we use the rules? Did we play by those rules? The question, did we do the right project, on the other hand, is looking at whether the selection of this particular project was adequate. Now, hindsight is 10/10, of course, but did we play by the rules? And obviously the circumstances can change, but at the time when the decision was made, it was the right decision. Now, what kind of project selection mechanisms do we have? Interesting fact, when we look at the reports by APM and Wellington, a large number of executives said, well, I make that decision. The following year, that percentage was basically halved, probably after they've been told, well, this is not the correct answer according to the book. And it really makes me question, is this genuine? Have people understood what project management does? Looking at organizations from the outside and the inside, I can comfortably say no. They still haven't understood the true nature of project management. They still think this is a software or an app that you download and install on the organization. It is not. Never treat project management as an app, a software that you install on top of what you already have in the organization. It will lead to errors, mistakes, failures. Now, looking at the situation, we need to accept that sometimes the best plans, the action, and the most careful selected projects can still lead to failure. So no matter what our intention was, a lot of things are out of our hands. And when the environment changes, when change happens, we need to ask ourselves, are the rules that we are using to play still current? Is the game still so that we want to play? How do we make sure that our decision-making criteria are still accurate in light of what is going on in the world? And that is where the lessons learned review comes into play. What we do in a lessons learned review is that we completely assess the project on all levels in a very critical fashion. We need to think about doing unthinkable things like question everything across the project. But for that to happen, we need to stop the "this is how we do it" attitude that a lot of especially higher managers often display. We need to be able to step outside that comfort zone of "this is what we do" and actually question our daily doing, our daily bread and butter. If we are not able to step outside our comfort zone, if we are not able to push further, we will not learn, we will not grow, and the world will move on without us. The question whether this should be done externally or internally and centralized is a matter of contest. So the advantages of an external evaluator is that you actually invite a fresh pair of eyes that does not suffer from groupthink and can more easily adopt a neutral stance and say, well, this is really not how you should be doing this. The downside is that sometimes you need to look at things through a lens of your own. And if you do not get a database of information and knowledge out of it, what is the actual point? Obviously, both cost time and money. And if people do not see the immediate benefit, they are reluctant to spend that money. When you are centralizing these things, you have a professional body within the organization, potentially a fresh pair of eyes from the organization that consistently reviews projects basically on a daily basis. And you have, of course, the advantage that the database is in-house. Now the question is, will these people be affected by groupthink, or will the people working on projects consider these people not their own because, hey, they are criticizing us? There is also the danger that people that are concerned with evaluation will develop some form of elitism and look down on everybody who is performing in projects. And obviously, as I said, both cost money, and money is a scarce resource. For a complete and neutral feedback, outside the project and business evaluators will provide more benefits to you in the long run. However, that evaluator immediately becomes a stakeholder, which requires a mutual engagement and continued long-term collaboration in terms of getting better with project management by using external expertise. The advantage of a centralized knowledge base benefits not only your organization, but all organizations and all project managers. Professional organizations can maintain these databases and generate the potential for everybody in the business to engage in continued professional development. Now, speaking of continued professional development, it is time to look at what do professional organizations do. And the most famous ones are obviously PMI, Excelos, those are the people of Prince 2, APM, IPMA, and two new contesters, Green Project Management and P3 Express. Now, what these organizations do, they are a central hub of data, knowledge, and best practices. For example, PMI publishing the PMI body of knowledge. They are awarding credentials for people that undergo examinations. They offer people a community of professionals that can engage and exchange information more freely. These organizations publish a lot of resources and allow you to conduct continued professional development in a controlled environment. So making credentials and professionalism comparable. Now, why would we do that? Why would we become part of these professional organizations? And the networking and staying on top of information alone is a serious reason to consider being part of a professional organization. Now, being a part of such an organization immediately also gives you as a person more credibility and employability. On the other hand, I know a lot of senior project managers that persistently refuse to be a part of any professional organization. And they say, why would I do that? I have 20, 30 more years of experience. If you do join professional organizations, join the one or the ones that match with your interests. Get credentials if they actually contribute to furthering your career. Do remember, project management is about people. These skills are more important than what you know. And emotional intelligence will always be more important than your actual IQ. Now it's time to actually look at risk management and give a brief rundown on modern project risk management. What is actually risk? Risk is something that happens that you don't want to happen. And projects as a venture that is trying to produce something new are inherently risky. So every time you get out of your comfort zone, you are in a risky situation. And risk management is not eliminating those risks per se, they still exist. But we actually focus on managing the events that could negatively affect the project. If something that happens could positively affect the project, why would we want to manage that? We would actually like to increase the chance of it happening. But we are asking the questions, what could go wrong? How bad could it go wrong? What can we do about it? Risk management is essentially a four-step process. Number one, we need to identify what are the risks. In step number two, we want to assess the risks, look at how bad it could be. Step three is developing risk responses and managing those risks through our risk response. And as a fourth task, a continuous process of monitoring risks. A big mistake a lot of people make is at the beginning of the project, they run through a risk evaluation and then forget about it. But as the project evolves, as the world continues to exist and carry on, the risks change. Not only the type of risks that we would encounter, but also the likeliness and their impact. Now, when we look at it from a more philosophical aspect, every event that is happening in the world could potentially influence our project. We do not know if it does and to what extent until we actually engage in a risk identification and management process. Now, how would we identify risks? Asking the question, what could go wrong? This really invites a brainstorming, assuming the worst case, what could go wrong in any situation, and thinking outside the box, being creative, and let's go crazy and look at what could actually go wrong. And looking at Murphy's Law, anything that could possibly go wrong will eventually go wrong at the worst possible moment. What we are doing in this scenario, we are creating categories of stuff that can go wrong, which makes this much easier to handle. And as I said, be creative in your line of thought. Eventually you will see, okay, that is so unlikely, it is not going to happen. This is not of a concern because if it happens, it won't impact us very much. But doing this analysis and going through everything, also looking at your experience from the past in similar projects, in life, wherever, whatever has happened before, use all the knowledge you can have. And going through the process, you will see that some things are relevant, other things are not. But while things change, while the project moves on, you can see that new risks may develop and certain risks might disappear, become irrelevant. Certain events will change several risks at once, and we need to rethink our risk management on a daily basis, essentially. How do we then class and assess the risks? Asking the question, how bad will it be? Or how much will it cost that if it really happens? And what we are trying to do is we want to quantify the financial impact of what happens. So we are looking at how likely is this to happen? How much is the damage? Multiply these two figures and then understand, okay, this is how bad it can be. Now, this is not an assessment of this will happen. This is the risk we are looking at. And we are talking about quantitative and qualitative assessment. This is used to develop our risk canvas. And in order to manage the risk, to decide our response to it, we need to do a 360 on every single risk. Now, what are our options? What will we do if that happens? Now, first we can try to avoid the risk. We can try to mitigate the impact, or we can accept, well, it happens. Now, avoiding the risk, we need to look at developing redundancies. If A happens, then we will do B to compensate. We could also change the process and work around the problem so it doesn't occur. If we want to mitigate the risk, we are actually trying to reduce the likeliness or the damage of the risk event. We could, for example, buy insurance for a certain risk. We could change the process slightly so that it reduces the likeliness of the risk. We could use different materials to reduce the damage of potential risk. So essentially what we are doing here is we are playing around with the actual project, not in terms of we want to avoid this, we accept that it could happen, but we want to reduce the likeliness and the severity of the impact. But sometimes risk happens. A lot of things in the world are out of our hand, and sometimes a risk is not very likely to occur. How likely is it that an asteroid hits your construction site? Not very likely. We could also say we are such a successful and affluent company, we can afford not to look at this risk. We can accept that. Sometimes managing, avoiding or mitigating risk is way too expensive. So we have to accept, yeah, this is the possible impact. But if we don't engage in this, we can't complete the project, which has much higher benefits of the negative impact of a risk event. Now, this is again a strategic consideration. What is more important, that we complete the project or that we avoid a certain risk that is associated with the project? That is a strategic decision at the executive level. Whatever we choose, we need to develop a risk response matrix. Essentially saying, if this happens, this is how we will respond to it. And for every single risk, you need this kind of response. Because when the risk happens, you do not have the time to actually then start thinking about, oh my God, what can we do? You need to have a response ready straight away. And this is how such an overview could look like. For example, there could be rain on the day of an outdoor event. What is the impact? There could be low attendance and we would incur a financial loss. The likelihood of this occurrence is medium. The degree of impact is high. Action on trigger We are going to look at the weather forecast 2 days before the event. We are assigning project associate Laura to that problem, and our response plan is we reserve indoor space right now. We recruit extra volunteers to work around the clock to set up the indoor venue in case we have a weather report that says rain on day of event. We need to develop a detailed response plan in case this happens so we can smoothly switch over to plan B. Now, let's just say there is a road construction. That means we will have reduced attendance and reduced revenue. The likelihood of occurrence is considered high, impact is high. Then we need to look at what does the highway department say in their construction schedule. We assign project associate Alison, and the response plan is to identify alternate routes, have signs made, and to poster these signs in case we have a detour because of road construction. It would also be a good idea in this case to make an announcement in the media somewhere between road construction occurring and the couple of days before the event happens. How do we control this kind of situation? How do we control for risk? And I like to use the expression from Henry V, once more unto the breach, which essentially says risk management is not a one-off process. Change happens and we need to continuously review the risk response plan so that we do not fall short at a very critical moment in time. Obviously, if a new situation occurs, it requires a new analysis. And with things changing in the world and in the project on a daily basis, we need to go forward and develop our learning curve, understanding that really everything could potentially affect our project. What we don't want to look at is what Benjamin Franklin called for the want of a nail. Small issues can have massive knock-on effects and lead to dramatic outcomes. Now, in the poem that Benjamin Franklin is reciting here, eventually, for the lack of one nail, a country was lost to an enemy. Do not overlook the small things, especially in projects. They can have dramatic outcomes, dramatic effects, if you do not manage your project well. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you have liked my old slides and hope to see you on the new slides in another place soon.